When the sirens wailed, I grabbed my daughter and ran for the shelter. The sky glowed red from the bombs. We heard explosions one after another, shaking dust from the ceiling. I kept whispering, "It will be over soon." But the fear in everyone's eyes told me they knew it would not. In 1939, as Europe teetered on the edge of catastrophe, after years of diplomatic tension, territorial ambition, and the failure of appeasement, the world witnessed the irreversible moment that transformed accumulating anxieties into full-scale war, when on September 1, Germany invaded Poland, acting under Adolf Hitler's strategic conviction that swift, overwhelming force, embodied in the newly developed doctrine of Blitzkrieg, would stun opponents, fracture enemy communication lines, and secure rapid territorial gains before the international community could respond. Beginning at dawn, German forces crossed the Polish border from multiple directions, north, south, and west, while the Luftwaffe unleashed devastating air raids on military installations, transportation networks, and civilian centers, signaling that this conflict would surpass previous wars in its speed, brutality, and disregard for non-combatant safety. And as Polish resistance fought desperately to hold ground, despite being technologically outmatched and strategically encircled, European governments were thrust into urgent deliberation, especially the United Kingdom and France, who had issued prior guarantees to defend Poland's sovereignty. Guarantees forged from the recognition that unchecked aggression by Nazi Germany would inevitably threaten the stability of the entire continent. Diplomatic messages flew across embassies, government cabinets convened emergency sessions, and the world held its breath during these tense hours, when the possibility, however slim, remained that Germany might halt its assault under threat of broader conflict. Yet, Hitler, committed to expansionist aims articulated in Mein Kampf and sharpened by earlier annexations of Austria and Czechoslovakia, believed that Britain and France would once again hesitate to act, and thus he pressed forward confidently. Unaware or dismissive of the profound global consequences that would follow, on September 3, when no withdrawal came, the United Kingdom issued an ultimatum demanding that Germany cease its attack, and upon its expiration, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain somberly announced to the British public that the nation was now at war with Germany. A declaration echoed soon after by France, thereby transforming a regional invasion into the opening chapter of the Second World War. These declarations marked not only a formal military commitment, but also a moral and political turning point, representing the collapse of diplomatic strategies that had attempted to maintain peace through concessions, and symbolizing a renewed resolve to oppose totalitarian expansion. Meanwhile, in Poland, the invasion intensified as German armored divisions pressed deeper into the country, while the Luftwaffe continued relentless bombing campaigns that hindered Polish mobilization and inflicted heavy casualties on soldiers and civilians alike. European newspapers recorded scenes of chaos, bravery, and uncertainty, families fleeing cities engulfed in flames, Polish troops mounting valiant but outmatched defenses along rivers and fortified lines, and government officials attempting to coordinate resistance while negotiating international aid. Yet the wider geopolitical landscape was even more complicated, for just days before the invasion, Germany and the Soviet Union had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression agreement that secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, granting Hitler the assurance that the USSR would not intervene and enabling a coordinated partition of Poland, which would become evident later in September when Soviet forces invaded from the east, further sealing Poland's fate. During these opening weeks, radio broadcasts across Europe carried reports of troop movements, casualty estimates, diplomatic protests, and somber reflections on the failure to prevent yet another continent-wide war. And as governments activated mobilization plans, civilians prepared for air raids, rationing, evacuations, and the long ordeal they knew lay ahead. Historians would later view September 1939 as a moment of tragic inevitability, the culmination of unaddressed grievances following World War I, the inadequacies of the Treaty of Versailles,
the economic turmoil of the Great Depression, and the rise of authoritarian regimes that exploited national desperation. Yet for those living through it, the transition from peace to war was jarring, surreal, and heavy with apprehension. For even though the declarations by the UK and France represented a united stand against aggression,
few could foresee the staggering scale of destruction that would unfold over the next 6 years, encompassing not only Poland and Western Europe, but eventually the entire globe. In subsequent days after the declarations, British and French forces, though bound by alliance, were slow to launch major offensive operations, resulting in what would later be termed the phony war on the Western Front, a period of relative inactivity compared to the desperate fighting in Poland, whose army struggled heroically against the dual assault from Germany and later the Soviet Union, even as international appeals for assistance failed to alter the course of events. Nevertheless, the declarations of war on September 3rd irrevocably shifted global alignments and forced neutral nations to reconsider their positions, setting in motion diplomatic, economic, and military transformations that would shape every aspect of global society. Thus, the events of September 1 through September 3, 1939, the invasion of Poland and the swift declarations of war by the UK and France form a pivotal narrative that marks the true beginning of World War II, encapsulating the collapse of fragile peace, the rise of totalitarian ambition, the resolve of democracies to resist aggression, and the start of a conflict whose ramifications would echo far beyond the battlefields of Europe and into the collective memory of humanity for generations to come.